Are you sick and tired of lame-ass social media? Are you tired of turning on the TV and being bored to tears? Well, never fear. Roundtable Philosophy is here to save the day, bringing you new and interesting podcasts each and every week. Let's get the party started. So we have Jimmy again, talk about gun control part 2. It's been a little while, but let's give Jimmy a proper welcome. All right, Jimmy, it's good to have you back, man. So how have you been?
Good. Just been busy working crazy amounts of hours.
All right, so last time we kind of talked about basically responsibility and ownership of being a smart gun owner and things surrounding that. So we really didn't talk about the Second Amendment last time from your perspective as a civilian and as a police officer. What does the Second Amendment mean to you, and what are you taught whenever you enter the academy?
It's word for word, just like every other part of the amendment, the Bill of Rights. You take it at face value and then apply it, as best you can to everyday life. As long as you are not a convicted felon, then you've got every right to protect yourself in any manner you deem necessary. The argument that, oh, well, why can't I have a machine gun? Why can't I have this? Why can't I have an F-18? Because they're not practical, right? Nobody's walking around with a 28-pound, squad automatic weapon trying to protect their family and their house. As an officer, I've walked up on people or whatever else, and they turn around, and I see a gun in their waistband. It raises the hair on the back of my neck a little bit, because I know, there's a lot of guns, especially on the South, there's a lot of people who have a lot of guns. So I go in houses, and a lot of my questions are the first time. Do you have any weapons on you? Are there weapons in the house? These domestics, things like that, because I want to know. You know what I mean? I know I'm bringing a gun to this little situation we got going on as an officer, because wherever I go, there's at least one gun with me. So, as a safety standpoint, I want to know who I'm dealing with, whatever else. But I also believe in people's rights to defend themselves. And your Joe Blow average citizen, I'm not too worried about them having guns on them or guns in the house and everything else. It's, again, like I said last time, it's the felons and the people who should not have, by law, should not have weapons. And that's a part of, when you are convicted of a felony, you do give up your Second Amendment rights. You have a Fourth Amendment waiver, where a lot of times when guys on parole, they sign a Fourth Amendment waiver that means they can be searched, and the people they're with can be searched at any time for any reason that I just show up and be like, hey, time to search your house because of those convictions and everything else for being a felon. Now, the non-felon side, I don't see any stipulations in any of those words saying that, oh, well, you can't have modern weapons, they didn't anticipate AR-15s or guns that could shoot 30 rounds in X amount of seconds, or, whatever, or handguns that could be concealed easily, and, all this other craziness that people kind of throw out there as anti-gun arguments, just like in the First Amendment, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, things like that. Nobody's saying that they didn't anticipate the internet, they didn't anticipate televisions and all this crazy crap, so that's why we're not just regulating free speech to printed newspapers, you know what I mean? Like, nobody's saying that you can't say anything bad about the government on the internet because it's modern technology, and they didn't anticipate that, like people do with the argument of the Second Amendment. Nobody's arguing that, oh, well, they didn't mean I couldn't. Your Fourth Amendment doesn't extend to vehicles and, luggage and all this other crap because they didn't anticipate flying planes and this, that, and the other. Taking it forward, like I said before, kind of reiterating, you take it basically at face value. Being necessary to a free state, or necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people keeping bear arms shall not be infringed. And the people is everybody. When you couple that with these gun control laws people are trying to pass, they're toting a real fine line on violating that constitutional right.
So then I guess it's basically saying, as a citizen, if the government, I guess, gets out of hand, you have a right to defend yourself against them. How does that extend to self-defense and home defense? And if you're traveling and you have a concealed carry permit, I think a lot of people think if I follow the Second Amendment right, then I can just own as many guns as I want of whatever kind and carry them wherever I want, as long as I use them responsibly and I have the correct paperwork and documentation for every gun. But do you think that that's a correct statement, or do you think that people kind of abuse it and they don't really have a true understanding of what it means?
You'll follow along those same kind of lines too, because it doesn't say, well-regulated militia equipped with muskets, equipped with flintlock pistol. They don't specify. It's just being necessary to security of a free state. So yes, that means if Florida and Georgia don't see eye to eye, and we decide, hey, you know what, time to go to war, or foreign invasion, things like that. That was what this Second Amendment was about. Also against the federal government. There was a huge issue between more of a, if I remember our history right, Alexander Hamilton and I want to say Thomas Jefferson and a couple others, but just boundary in between. Do we have more federal government, more control at the federal level, or do we have more control on the state level? And it's just constant ebb and flow of power. In the last 60 to 80 years, it's been more steady concentration of power at the federal level. We expect the government to do everything. So this Second Amendment is kind of, in the sense of necessary of a security of a free state, is diminishing on a state right level. It's more of a whole as a United States in the entire country. That's why we will never, ever be invaded. And if we ever are, it's going to be a hell of a fight because of the amount of weapons that Joe Blow citizen has. Kind of go on the other side of it a little bit. It's a well-regulated militia. We are the militia, right? Fighting age men and women are made up of the militia. So does that only curtail to our National Guard, our military, now versus back then, which was, hey, you guys are all conscripted. Come on. We really don't have that now. We have the draft, but, it's not really an issue anymore with the amount of people volunteering to go into military service and things like that. So there's that thing, like, what makes up a militia? Is it a regimented, uniformed group of men and women that, are trained, or is it anybody and everybody that can fight? That's the hiccup, I guess, people are kind of having and going back and forth over it.
Based on the Second Amendment and the way that it's written, do you believe that the interpretation made by the Supreme Courts regarding the Second Amendment are correct? And if so, do you think that they will probably change their interpretations in the near to far future from now?
I think their interpretation is pretty accurate. Like I said, I believe everybody, I don't care who you are, you have a right to defend yourself, right? Even if you're a convicted felon, but based on your past choices and everything else, you have to live those consequences of not being able to use a firearm. But I've seen plenty of, if you're a convicted felon, I can almost guarantee you have a crossbow in your house. If you live in the South, you got a crossbow. One, because they hunt, and two, because that's not a firearm. And I've seen tons and tons and tons. And the more country and the more, out in the sticks you get, the more bows and all this other crap.
Do you believe that they will make any changes to the Second Amendment?
I don't think so. They have too much political pressure. Groups like the NRA, which is the number one group because it's the largest and it's been around most well established. But now you get all these other groups, the Oath Keepers, made up of, you've probably seen them when they were doing that Bundy Ranch fiasco a couple years ago. The Oath Keepers went out there. They're made up of law enforcement officers, civilians, and military men and women that keeping their oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. So they go out there and, just like any other group, you got some squared away people and you got some screwballs. Groups like that and getting more and more political influence and everything else. If anybody was seriously going to, okay, you know what, we're going to scrap the Second Amendment and rewrite it. No, it ain't going to happen. They don't have the pull or the numbers they need to get something like that passed. It would take a utter catastrophic event, and just like a complete change of heart in the country, akin to like slavery when we got rid of that stuff, and started abolishing that. It was a huge shift in the consciousness of the country, and it would take the same way to go for us to go, you know what, yeah, maybe you guys are right, no guns, you know what I mean?
Basically, the Bill of Rights is ratified somewhere around 1790s. And at this time in history, all of the people who are ratifying the Bill of Rights are the more educated, more elite of the American society. Some are politicians, some are just educated men that are involved. They're well read. They've read Julius Caesar. They've read about the history in England and the Civil Wars, the Cromwellian era. They're familiar with all these things. And basically what happened in all of those examples is the leader becomes a dictator and then removes the Republic, removes Parliament, removes the House of Lords, the House of Commons, basically crushes them, brings his army in, and takes over. So for a long time in America, after the Revolutionary War ended, we didn't have a standing army. There was no provisions for an army because we were afraid of an army. Mm-hmm. Washington wasn't going to live very long, and everybody knew it. And who would replace him? If he were to die, someone else is going to take power. If they have an army, what's going to stop them from keeping power? Because we're a brand new nation. So one of the ways of getting around this concept was we allow everyone to have weapons. Should someone raise an army and want to take over, mm-hmm. the people would resist this, and then that is the purpose of the Second Amendment. So if we expand that further and claim that the next person who takes office, whoever it is, up and decides they don't want 2 terms only. They want to be president for life. And it's happened in several non-American countries before that a dictator who was elected by the people has refused to give up power. Yeah. He marches his army and removes parliament. It's absolutely possible that can occur. So if you are going to stand up against an army, you should have the equivalent of what the army has. Now that gets a little impractical in today's world where you have Stinger missiles and you have tanks and you have armored personnel characters and you have 50 caliber machine guns. It's unpractical for a group of people now in today's society to stop a portion of the American army from taking over and enforcing martial law. So this is kind of where the original concept of the Second Amendment kind of falls apart. And as history goes on, it falls apart even more. In history class, if you didn't specifically learn about it, I know I did because being from New York and this happened right next to New York, it was something we had to learn. In 1791 to 1794, there was a group of people in western Pennsylvania who were making their own whiskey, and of course the government said, no, we're going to tax you. So this entire group in western Pennsylvania said, no, we're not, and the whole reason our fathers and brothers fought and died in the Civil War was because the Revolutionary War was because we're being taxed without representation, so we're not doing this. So the news came to Washington, who gets reports that these people are having an armed uprising against the government, and they've taken over the Capitol building. So, of course, Washington decides he has to do something about it, forms a standing army, basically arrests these people, punishes them accordingly. Not very many people died in the actual battle. But ever since then, we've had a standing army because we've been afraid that groups of people in our own nation would rebel in large groups and that we would have to put them down. And it really starts to divide into the need for the government to be able to control the people, at least partially, while maintaining the same image that we need people to protect us should a politician, group of people, or the army run some sort of coup d'etat. So it's kind of an interesting situation. But if you extend the concept further, all throughout history, you have examples of governments taking arms away from people. So everyone in probably America is familiar with the movie of Braveheart and the concept that when the English king took over Scotland, he made it illegal for them to have any sort of weaponry because he did not want them to have the ability to rebel against him. You can read the facts on that. It's a little different than the actual movie, but they basically did not allow the English to have certain types of weapons. In 1669, King Louis made a law that says when you're at a dinner table, you cannot have a pointed knife. And the reason he did this is apparently it was so common for the upper echelon of society in France to get in drunken arguments during dinner that they would stab each other to death, that King Louis decided sharp knives were not allowed. So this is kind of an attempt to not necessarily remove weapons from the populace, but limit where weapons are allowed to be carried and when they should be carried, because people are naturally violent. In China, you have the formation of certain types of martial arts, which have very large and fluidly movements, and your training is in an almost dance pattern. Because they were not legally allowed to practice martial arts, they had to devise a way where they could still practice it without openly doing your standard large group military martial arts activities. So all through history, we have people in power or people attempting to seize power remove weapons from the powerless. This happened in Nazi Germany, I believe in 1933, that said any Jewish person who has a firearm, if they don't turn it in within a certain period, I believe it was 2 days, could be executed on site for failure to follow the law. Now, granted, historians will argue that taking weapons away from Jewish people was not the only reason that the Holocaust happened. It was not the reason that Hitler took power. Arguably, that's true. However, you can kind of see the correlation. The fear to that is people will take it to the extreme and say, people who want to take your guns away are attempting to cause genocide. And that's not true because, as Jim said earlier, it's impractical to defend your house with a 50 caliber machine gun. If you were in Egypt when the government rose up, had a coup d'etat a little while ago, what is to stop them from doing that? The average man can't walk out of his house with a Mosin Nagant or a 1940s rifle, which he would have been legally able to own, and take somebody out who has brand new AK-47 with a tank behind him.
All throughout history, there's always been that. Certain people will start consolidating power. They'll start passing laws for the good of people. You need to give up your weapons because, we're a civilized country. There's no need for these things anymore. People, we're naturally aggressive animals who are better at expressing their arguments better than others. And others just decide to use their fists, weapons, whatever. But as a society, there's always been a pendulum effect, and we're seeing it in different aspects of our culture nowadays. For a long time, it was a lot of anti-cop stuff, a lot of anti-military, anti-gun, in mainstream media and everything else. And now it's swinging back the other way. It's more pro-military, pro-law enforcement, pro-guns and stuff like that. A well-armed people are going to have a hell of a time being overrun by the military. Look at Yemen, Syria. When all that stuff started, the military was bombing the hell out of those people, left, right, up, and down. And yet they still persisted because of the way we fight nowadays. It's no longer out in the, if we were out World War II, out in the deserts, with the freaking tanks and, all that other crap, yeah, you're going to get smoked. But the urban combat nowadays, there is a good chance of regular civilians standing up to an overreaching government or even a tyrannical one. Do I expect anybody in our country to really do that? Absolutely not. I mean, I would say we probably get hit by an asteroid and get destroyed that way first before our government decided to step up and was like, no, we're going to start rounding people up and taking all your firearms away and everything, just because of it's political suicide in our country. Now, these small little steps, that's what everybody's worried about nowadays. You give an inch, they take a mile. So if you register your firearms, they're going to know where your firearms are at. I'm very modern, that's why I see both sides. I don't want to know. I want people to know what I've got in my house, what kind of weaponry and how many rounds and all this other crap. It's none of their damn business. But at the same time, you're also weighing the good and the bad for what's good, again, for your people and then for the nation so at large. You know what I mean? Yes, more gun control. We will be able to determine who has guns, when they have guns, what kind of guns they're able to have, and all sorts of stuff. But then where's your freedom kick in? You know what I mean? As a free man, it's nobody's business what I own, how I own it, or anything else. As long as I pay my taxes, I don't commit any crimes, I should be able to have whatever the hell I want. I mean, nobody's telling you, oh, your cars can't go over 90 miles an hour. There's absolutely no need for a car to go 90 miles an hour, but nobody's saying that because it's a moot argument.
Jim, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. The general consensus is reasonableness. You have to be reasonable, and that should be the goal. However, one of the things that I just want to bring up simply for historical references, I found a list of basically the majority of genocides that have been committed in the last century. Each one was preceded by gun control laws by an average of about 3 to 5 years. Some were very drastic, like as we talked about with Nazi Germany or with the Ottomans, basically taking an ethnic group and not giving them the right to have guns.
Yeah.
So we can understand that is we're targeting people, and we know in America that most likely that's not going to happen. However, in the 1860s, that did happen. After the Civil War, blacks were not allowed to have firearms in the South as an attempt to Jim Crow, beat them down, and keep them subservient. And then, so finally, I think it was 8 years after that law was passed, it was finally shot down by, I think, the Georgian Supreme Court. They said it's against the Constitution because they were forced to give black people rights as citizens at that time. So it's really a confusing argument, and I don't know if it really applies to what we're talking about now, simply because those conditions don't exist in America presently. I mean, there are arguments that racism will always exist, but that kind of racism doesn't exist in America presently, so it's really not applicable. But that was 150 years ago?
Like you said, I don't see that ever happening here. I mean, yes, we did in a sense in World War II with the Japanese. We started doing the internment camps and everything else. But in our particular society now, I don't see us singling out any group without extreme backlash by everybody else. I mean, hell, you can't even eat meat in certain areas of the country without people getting pissed off at you. So is something as extreme as that possible? Yes. Probable? No. And that's why I'm not terribly worried about a lot of these gun control laws going on, to the sense where I'm going to start stockpiling thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds and, more guns that I can carry. I have enough guns and ammunition that I can get my family and move. If I need to get into a gunfight, I have enough to get me through a couple of gunfights, and then I can continue moving on. I'm not hunkered down, everything like that. So, and you have two camps, people that are like me, and then, well, really 3 camps. People like me, people that are like, I've got 50,000 rounds, I'm ready for the end of the world, and all you some bitches can come get some. And then the third group, which are, we need to get rid of all weapons and, sing kumbaya, and we didn't have weapons and people wouldn't get killed, which is fallacy.
Each gun control bill will always target either a group of people or a certain type of gun. The problem with this is the fact that it's not going to affect gun control in the slightest because no matter where you go, criminals are going to have guns regardless, no matter if the government outlaws it or not. It's just a simple fact. That's what happened with Prohibition back in the early century of last century. They outlawed whiskey and distilled beverages and whatnot.
Look at weed nowadays, or any type of drug. I mean, that can...
I know. That's why these control laws really are useless. All they are is a waste of time. On top of that, they don't really have any real results. I mean, if we look back, I don't even look back 100 years ago. I'll look back within the past 60 years. Nazi Germany. It had this gun control law set in place for 10 years, from 28 to 38. 13 million people died, or murdered, or oppressed because of this law. In China, from 1935 to 1957, whatnot though, their gun control law was a result of at least 20 million people dying. Guatemala, from 1871 to 1964, nearly an entire century, 100,000 people that are Maya Indians died who were banned from actually having firearms.
Yep.
You can go into Uganda, you can go into Cambodia. It's when I talk about targeting certain peoples, and the problem though is in America, the only people they're going to target are going to be people who actually follow the law and actually have the money able to afford firearms in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
Which leaves us wide open for people who are criminals who don't give a damn about the law in the first place and can do whatever the hell they want to.
Yeah, and that's the basis of it. It's not gun control, it's people control. And that's the argument that pro-gun control is making, saying that absolutely it will not change anything. If I'm going to go out and murder somebody and rob them and do whatever, you're going to do it regardless. And you're not going to give a damn that, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I couldn't have 30 rounds. You know what I mean? Or 10 rounds in my gun, I can only have 7. They don't give a damn. And these little incremental laws are not going to change anything. It is easier to say, let's do reduced magazine capacities, let's do your barrel has to be 16 inches, all these other stupid things, than to sit there and say, okay, well, let's look at our culture as a whole. What kind of crap are we promoting to kids, and why are families not freaking so many baby daddies in the world? It's a lot easier to do that than it is to look at everything else and ask seriously tough questions and figure out mental health issues and fund those things.
As a gun enthusiast and a professional who handles firearms on a regular basis, is your opinions on the matter of gun control pretty much that it's useless, and the fact the only way you can really control guns, much less crime with guns, is with a more substantial education when it comes to firearm handling? Or do you think it requires other types of efforts?
It is so many different facets. It's a cultural thing. People need to have respect for life to begin with, right? They have to have respect for their fellow, human beings and everything else and their fellow countrymen. Start realizing that instant gratification isn't the end-all be-all, because that's what a lot of this is. I want what I want, and I want it yesterday mentality is a lot of what I see on the road. Instead of working towards something and, okay, I'm going to save up, I'm going to do this, whatever. No, I'm going to get it now. So what do I need to do? I need to sell drugs, I need to do this, whatever. And an onion, just layer after layer after layer. And you look at mental health issues, you look at family, were they abused? How did they grow up? Did they grow up in a family where everybody's smoking weed and it's the gangster lifestyle? I've seen plenty of kids, 9, 8 years old, punching other kids in the face and stealing cell phones. Hell, I had 2 calls of that in a week where a 9-year-old kid punched an 8-year-old kid in the mouth and stole his dad's cell phone. Because why the hell not? That was okay. That is acceptable to those people. There's just so much that you will never ever really fully understand, really wrap our heads around to figure out what is it, how can we stop gun violence. We're never ever going to stop. People back in the day were freaking cut up and stabbed at dinner and everything else. Well, that's a part of our culture now.
Just to jump in here, I think a couple of times now we brought up the idea that that there's a viewpoint out there that if we had no guns, then nobody would die. We all know that's wrong. Yeah. And it's a bit of a straw man attack on the kind of the pro-control and pro-ban side of the fence. Mm-hmm. I'm going to just kind of characterize it as there's really no one serious out there that believes that we can truly ban them and they would disappear and deaths would go away. I mean, all the stats we have and the studies we have, we know people are going to be violent towards one another.
Yeah.
The more rational, or possibly just the more studious, let's just call them ban advocates, out there, see it more as just
banning the common people from having guns would cause a drastic reduction in the number of deaths from these arguments. Not that they wouldn't still happen. I mean, you still have, hammers and baseball bats and knives and everything else. The average person has a much harder time killing someone with a knife or a baseball bat than they do a gun. That's kind of one of their views, at least as I've found it. And to kind of go along with that, the majority of the gun deaths, at least in the United States, statistically happen from domestic violence. And so that would take it a little bit further as well. It's less likely that the partner would be killed in the incident, possibly seriously maimed, but it would still be another human that's alive. The studies I've seen on these are somewhat mixed. It's a very complicated issue. I mean, you have to factor in cultural issues, and all sorts of things go into the study of it. So it's hard to get good statistics to see if any of this stuff works. The one I've seen referenced the most recently was a gun ban that took place in Australia, which kind of best described as its general populace doesn't get to own guns anymore. However, there are exceptions for people who are professional hunters, or they're farmers, or they're sportsmen. Basically, there's still a way to get a gun to defend your land and personal property and self if needed, but it has to be demonstrated. This one's been kind of similar in result to a lot of the others, where it seems as if there's an initial period of a couple of years or months where general crime goes up, but then gun-related deaths fall dramatically. And so some people are calling that one a success, but if you look at England, I don't know if it's entirely a success because they have a very similar approach to it.
They're saying it was successful in Australia?
Yeah, it's no one's going to end murder. You can't do it. But it makes a drastic reduction in the number of people that die from altercations. My feeling on this is really more that I think we should kind of go the opposite direction. You can do that, you can remove the guns, maybe general society gets a little less deadly. But then you also remove one of the reasons that America wanted to keep the guns, and that was to have a second option for taking out despots or any type of truly undue tyranny where the people can rise up.
To the Australia one, actually the murder rate I think increased 300% in the years following the initial handgun ban. Handgun ban started in January 1997. It was roughly about 11.4 homicides per million people, and it steadily climbed up to a peak of 18 homicides per million people after the gun ban. It peaked out there, and then it decreasingly was reduced. It's just the way it is. I mean, if we were to go out and ban guns, by no means I don't think anybody would go, oh, okay, great, run out in the streets and start talking all this crap, thinking that they're not going to get murdered or anything like that. Because unlike Australia is very isolated, right? They're out in the freaking ocean. They're a goddamn island. And majority of their people are also on the East Coast. So in that aspect, in that argument, their weapon control, their imports, and everything else is easily controlled. For us, when you look at groups like the Mexican Mafia, MS-13, Crips, Bloods, you name any major gang, Latin Kings, I can go on for days. We already have a hard enough time policing them and their weapons. So for our country, majority of our murder rates actually is gang violence in these inner cities. Yes, domestic violence is a terrible thing, and a lot of people do end up getting killed in those because of the weapons in their house. I've dealt with domestic violence where people have been beaten with bats, choked to death, but like they felt like they were dying. Tons of back assault cases on that. I have yet to work one where somebody was shot, and I work in the sticks. When these countries, Nazi Germany, were saying, okay, Jews handing their guns, the Chinese farmers manhandling their weapons, things like that, that didn't turn into the Communist Party. You're going to have that against the law-abiding American people. Your gangbangers and everything else, it's going to be police officers, military, which due to our laws are not allowed to operate inside the United States, and then it's gang members. And, your fringe, hood rats and stuff like that, people who just don't give a damn. Those are the people that are going to have weapons. I honestly think you would see more home invasions and everything else because they're going to be more bold. And like the argument made last podcast, if you had 3 homes, home one's waving American flags, NRA, don't tread on me flags, this home is proudly protected, blah, 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 and if you see the sign, you're within range, all that crap. House B, anti-guns, and this gun's proudly gun-free, or home is proudly gun-free, or whatever. And then you have the home C, which is your average American house, which one you can kick that door in and go after. So obviously you're going to take the B, because A, has got guns, B, doesn't have guns, and C, you're not so sure. These people yeah, they may not be book smart, but they're not stupid. It's a risk versus reward. And when you remove that risk that somebody's going to be able to defend themselves, I'm going to be defending them with a bat and, my house with a bat or a crossbow or a freaking bow and arrow or whatever, and they're coming at me with a pistol or worse, then you're going to see a severe spike in crime. It may taper off like it did in Australia, but I doubt it because of the constant influx of guns and everything else coming in and out of Mexico.
Yeah, in general, I agree with you on that point. I think what we've seen in the cities in the United States that have strict gun control and even gun bans, and the UK and a few other countries and cities, I mean, you see domestic crime, like, robberies and home invasions and all that are much, much higher than they are in places like the southern United States, where guns are more prevalent. It's more uncertain whether or not you're going to get a shotgun to the face when you walk in the door.
Yeah. And I mean, and when it comes to domestic violence and everything else, you got to look at are they on substance, alcohol, drugs, how long has it been going on? Is it one of those things where the woman's like, but I love him, and, all that crap. I mean, I've had plenty of people, I've gone to these domestics, and they're just like, oh, I don't want to press charges. Okay. Like, prime example, one other week. Yeah, he's stalking me. He was outside my window all morning. Okay. Well, I don't want him to go to jail. Well, then why am I here? You know what I mean? Like, if you don't want me to do my job, you just want me to basically be the muscle behind you. Hey, go away, don't talk to her no more. And that's where a lot of that kind of stuff comes in. Like, I want to say it's enabled, but whether they're scared, if he goes to jail, how am I going to support the kids and everything else, blah, blah. There's, again, just like everything else, there is no simple answer. It's so many facets, so many layers of different things you should, have to take into account that it's almost impossible. So on a case-by-case basis, I don't see domestic violence as a cause to say, okay, we need to get rid of guns. For that, I mean, yes, obviously it's a tragedy, but and as a whole, it is such a small thing. It's like these guys saying the AR-15s need to go because of these mass shootings. The fucking douchebag in Colorado with the Batman movie. He killed a bunch of people in AR-15. He used a high-capacity magazine, right? Not what they want to call high capacity, which is their standard magazine of 30 rounds, but an actual high capacity, like 100-something rounds. And the stupid thing jammed. That's why he wasn't able to kill more people. So they want to say that. Okay, well, yeah, that was an extremely terrible tragedy. But does that in itself warrant, everybody to lose their right? I mean, if one drunk driver, kills a family of 5, do we now get rid of alcohol? Do we now get rid of vehicles, SUVs, because they turn over too much? And, so it's like I said, a straw man argument, basically.
Kind of to build on the uncertainty of the robbery and the car accidents and drunk drivers. So I've always kind of leaned towards the exact opposite way of the ban argument. And my thought is it should be mandated that you are trained to use at least one type of firearm in some sort of way. Just part of being a U.S. citizen. Not necessarily that you have to own one, but you should at least be trained with one. I also think you should do martial arts. That's a whole separate topic. But to me, it creates it's a very different culture if we do something like that. And it could lead a little bit further down the line to, well, maybe everyone's mandated to own one, but that might get a little crazy and expensive.
This might be more of a fascist type argument. What kind of like the Nazi Germany was being built up to be in the beginning. I think that it should be required that you got either a college education, that you go through military service, or some type of civil service. Okay, so law enforcement, firefighters, EMS, things like that, for at least 2 years. That should be a requirement. I mean, it's so ridiculously hard to do all that. It would take a drastic change. I think that will help our culture reinstill those values of personal responsibility, education, almost like a path, a goal. A lot of different countries have these mandatory services. By the time you're 36, you have to do 2 years. Korea, Italy. My mother was born and raised in Italy, so when I was 18, I had to determine if I was going to be an Italian citizen or a U.S. citizen. And if I was going to be an Italian citizen, then I had to go to Italy and serve 2 years in the military. So that's why that's like more of a fascist argument, because you're more pro-nationalistic pride, and that I think we have as a country, but we've kind of gotten away from. Because World War II, everybody was raring to go to war. We still have a lot of those people who are around or whatever. You see it throughout military and everything else. But there's a bunch of people, a whole generation of people that are like, bah. As our entertainment gets more prevalent, like it has been in the last 50 years, there's just more, whatever. Like, there's no conviction in people.
I wanted to build off of a point that you made a while ago, something that you kind of touched on about people resorting to violence in arguments. There's a saying that violence is the first resort of a weak mind. One of the things that concerns me, one of the aspects of the gun control argument that concerns me is if there are guns everywhere and people are just allowed to carry them around like the open carry people that walk around with machine guns and go into the local Chipotle or whatever it is, my feeling is if there are guns everywhere, then there are going to be situations where an argument starts over something petty, something like a parking space or road rage or a bar fight or something like that, and it could escalate very quickly, and there's potentially violent consequences that could come of people just carrying weapons everywhere with them and then getting into heated arguments over kind of petty everyday things.
Yeah, I see what you're saying in that. And it has happened in the past. I mean, hell, you've seen people get in a road rage and dudes whipping out freaking tire irons and they're bashing each other's heads in. There is a saying I like, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember exactly, but it's everybody's polite in a barbaric society because if you're impolite, you're going to get your head split open.
The point I'm trying to make is that it's a lot quicker and easier to impulsively shoot someone in the face than it is to, say, beat them over the head with a tire iron. If you have people who might potentially be impulsive, it could have some really serious consequences.
I can see definitely where your mind's at. I haven't seen it too much. Like I said, where I work, everybody damn near has weapons. Most people, you don't mind, and there's a bunch of them that you're like, hey, you know what, that's not a good idea. Personally, I would like to see more responsible people own weapons, but with that, I understand the concern, and I kind of share the same concerns too of how many people would be more apt to fly off the handle and start talking shit. Just like, a group of guys out in the bar. Sometimes they go out looking for a fight. That's all they want to do that night. Let's get a piece of ass or let's get into a fight. That's their goal. Will more weapons invite more violence? I mean, I don't know. We just run in cycles constantly. You're going to have spike in violence, and then it curtails off. When it comes to those kind of things, do we have more guns? Do we take away guns or anything like that? We're going to be violent no matter what. That's people. You're never going to stop school kids from dying. You're never going to stop old people from dying. You're never going to stop housewives from getting murdered. You're never going to stop husbands from getting murdered. It's just the way it is. To sit there and say, well, due to this aspect, or whatever, in these particular instances, we need to get rid of 30-round magazines. We need to get rid of this AR-15 or this pistol or whatever. You're constantly going to go back and forth. It's a cycle. If we ban them, we're going to want them. We're going to, oh man, look at all these, instances like that Uber driver that stopped that mass shooting. Concealed carry owner stopped a dude from shooting up a mall up in some city recently in the last couple of days. Perfect example of responsible gun owner ending a gunfight. And then you have the other aspect of it where people go, well, if he's out there shooting the bad guy and then everybody else pulls their guns and then it's just this freaking shoot out the OK Corral, everybody shooting everybody like we're a bunch of monkeys throwing poop. I don't see that happen. And it hasn't really happened as many times as people have been in these situations where mass shootings have been stopped by a civilian with a gun or an off-duty cop with a gun or, even off-duty military with a gun. I don't think any of these gun control arguments, pro or against, is really going to get anybody anywhere. This is the culture we live in, and now we have to figure out as a whole how to win back values in homes, personal responsibility, things like that, and then teach people basically, have them understand, from an early age, freaking respect of life.
So that's our show. Hopefully you found us entertaining. If not, send us an email and let us know. Go to www.roundtablephilosophy.com/contact. Fill out the form and give us your feedback. If you like, you can follow us on our Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/roundtablephilosophy. You can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/RTphilosophy. Other than that, just check out our site on a weekly basis for new and entertaining podcasts. Thanks so much.